What's happening, everybody? And welcome back to the Chaplaincy on the Go podcast. I'm your host, Josh Zorhoff. I'm a teaching pastor and a therapist in the West Michigan area, and I am happy to say that this podcast is brought to you by the Fearless family of churches. And we're continuing on in our two-part series on suicidal loss and grief with my friend, Terry Jelsema. Terry shared in the first episode about his experience with suicidal loss and his wife, Marlis. And we're going to continue on with that exchange in part 2 as Terry continues to talk with us about how God helped him heal. What did he need to tackle in terms of God? He's going to talk a little bit about what his thoughts were about suicide and the afterlife and how we need to be careful in how we approach that in the church and even outside of the church. But we're going to have a chance to explore more of Terry's healing journey and also hear where he is now in that journey and how he has moved into a new season of navigating grief and loss with a hope-focused outlook through gratitude and joy. And so I'm excited to hear what Terry has for us as we dive in right now.
Yeah, I think seeing we're talking about God, again, my personal experience here, because again, I'm also part of a suicide support group, and we have people from all religions in that group, and many who are no longer religious. And here goes, I have my own family has been splintered with a perspective, is God good? Because if God's good, then why would he take my mother? And you just guys, at church, we just had a sermon on this, right? And on top of that, it is the aspect of one thing I want to really clarify, and you did this literally within the first 24 hours in my family. You sat in front of our family and you said, listen, I know your mother, Marlis, is not in hell. Okay. I want to present that because in the culture I grew up, I'll leave it in a 30,000 foot view. The culture I grew up with, number one, it used to be a crime to commit suicide, right? And then number two, we as a church sometime will really hurt our own wounded, okay? And we had people come into support group last month who said their pastor at the funeral said that with the individual who passed from anxiety, depression, that, hey, your family member's in hell, we're sorry. I want to make sure that that's clear that I don't believe that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you've shared that with us that that's not true, but especially in suicide or hey, this is a choice, but I'm going to present this and I'm going to steal some of Vonnie Woodrick's words here. So Vonnie, here it is, a shameless plug. One of her best statements is, why is the brain the only organ that can fail? And when it fails, it's judged. No one will judge me for having heart disease. No one will judge me for having a tumor. No one will judge me if I've got cancer. We come around and we support you. But if an individual has anxiety, depression, mental health, we judge and we're critical. And like any other disease, any disease can claim you. Why can't anxiety and depression also has a mortality rate? It may be not as big as others, but it does. It can still claim you. And I want to make sure that at least from those individuals out there who are wrestling or dealing with, again, my life story or the suicidal loss, you need to hear that.
Yeah.
You need to hear that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Vonnie, and I want to get to that because there's some beauty there. But she started an organization called I Understand. And that's rooted in Grand Rapids. For those of you listening, if you one suicide impacts over 200 people. That is the recent statistic. And so that means that everybody knows someone who's been either directly or by a proxy impacted by that. And I remember her sharing with me once that she's trying to change the script of how we talk about suicide. In fact, I love her language. I have encouraged people to use her language, that people lose their battle to depression. And we have to start understanding, and I might keep that for the rest of my life. Why is it okay that every other organ can fail, but for some reason, when the brain fails, which is an organ, we judge it? I think that's culturally, I think that's really important. And on that, we often say things like, "Oh, anxiety, that's just in your head," or "Depression, that's just in your head," as if that makes it less real, as if for some reason it's just made up because it's in our head. The mind is actually the most powerful of organs. And so if it is in fact just in your head, it should be taken with that much sincerity, because it's the thing that controls everything else. And then I want to talk about the theology for a minute.
Please.
Okay.
I unleash you.
Yes, unleash me. Release me. First of all, just a note of compassion for pastors, lay leaders, people in the church who have said something unfortunate in a moment of pain. The reality is there is no such thing as the perfect person other than Jesus. And grief is profound. And even the best, most compassionate, most intellectually gifted pastors are going to get it wrong. They're going to. I have said things in sermons that I wish I could take back, and I can't. It's a reality. And so just to know that before we say this, and then to say this, there is no Bible verse, there is no word in the 800,000 plus words in the Old and New Testament, or the 80,000 verses, there is not a single one that tells us that someone who loses their battle to depression goes to hell. It is not there, period. That thought comes from a theology on the will of God, and that somehow in selecting to end our life, we somehow defy the will of God, and in defying the will of God, have some sort of unforgivable sin. And that's crap, because there is no verse at all that can support that. And I have at least once a year, maybe twice, I have sat with someone who has said, I just can't bear the thought of my loved one who lost their battle to depression, of being in hell. And again, I have to ask the question, who told you that? Who told you that? Sometimes it's a pastor. Sometimes it's someone who just doesn't know what to say, or is just repeating something that they heard.
Yeah.
I think for us as people in the church, I really appreciate your language of, can we make sure that we don't injure our wounded? Yeah. And let's be really careful first of all, when we talk about heaven and hell, let's just be really careful, because it's super complicated. I will say that near the end of his earthly life, Jesus was under so much stress that we are told in the Gospel of Luke that he was sweating drops of blood. Now, that's actually a medical reality, that the brain is under so much distress that the capillaries burst and we bleed from our sweat glands. I think it's called hydrotetrachondrosis or something. I said it in a sermon once. You're the one who had the medical, but yeah, you're like, I got nothing.
You got nothing.
So I want to just be clear that Jesus was under a profound amount of stress, knowing that he was not only going to be brutally murdered and executed, but he was going to bear the full weight of the sins of the world, past, present, and future. And he said to his followers, and I quote, "My soul is weary and burdened to the point of death." If Jesus can feel so overwhelmed that he doesn't know if he has the strength to go on, and he never sinned, we're clear on that. The Bible is emphatically clear that he never sinned. I think it's fair to say that when we feel overwhelmed to the point of death, we're in good company with Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Amen. One of the things, and this is again a personal theology, and please, people, don't drive through Hudson, don't throw holy water at me. But one of the personal sides of this is we worship a God who he was emotional. It's not just Jesus, half man, half God. It's God, right? God shows love, mercy, compassion, joy, happiness, but he also shows anger and wrath. And so part of me when I started coming out of the fog, one of the thoughts I had was, how do I connect with a God who seems so distant? How do I connect with a God who seems aloof, or what's going on, God? But one of the thoughts I had was, when Christ screamed out on the cross and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? I envision God hearing that, looking at the cherubim and the seraphim and said, I'm going to go in the temple. I'm going to close the door. And I know this is me. And he wept. He wept because his own son experienced the full force and weight of death and the separation and the brokenness of that bond. And part of me wants to think he may have threw a little furniture around and teared some ethereal fabric. But the idea, though, that God is emotional, and God does know where we are in these emotions that we experience. And here it is. I like to say this in as kind a way as possible, but I used a lot of adult words in my protest against God, and they were directed directly at God. And I'm sure, I haven't been hit by lightning yet, but I'm sure he had a few angels holding some lightning bolts back, going, okay, just let him go. But I also believe it's all right to be angry at God. It's all right to protest. It's all right to lay ourselves out right before him and go, you know what? I don't even know how to function right now. And you're probably where I shouldn't be putting my wrath and my anger and my frustration, my bitterness and resentment, blah, 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 but I am. And here it goes. And, I just feel that it's been, for me, part of my journey that has also been, I have such a great love for God. And I have a great respect, because I do believe that he took some punches he shouldn't have taken, but he understood it and he got it, and he still received me, and he still holds me and cherishes me and loves me.
I'm going to push back on one
Sure.
thing that you said. There are no angels holding back lightning bolts when we are in grief. They're not there. When my wife has a bad day, it is my privilege to bear the brunt of her frustrations.
Mm-hmm.
I am the safest person imaginable for her to be fully her with. Now, is it fair? No. Do I know that? Of course. But the reality is, it's my privilege to be that person. And I make huge mistakes, and sometimes I actually deserve her frustrations. God is okay. And in fact, I actually think longs for us to be that real with him. What he doesn't want is, and again, we go back to Genesis where he says, where are you? And why are you hiding?
Yeah.
I actually think God invites our anger, because that's how we feel, and our sorrow and our sadness and our pain. I want to read something that I've read this before, Terry. I think I probably read it to you, because I read it to everyone who's in grief, who comes to the place of saying, I don't know if God's okay with me being angry. Now, this is from Psalm 13, written by David. And he writes these words: "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." 2/3 of that psalm are nothing but anger and confusion. And David ends by saying, and in all of that, God is good to me. And I think he says God is good to me because he knows that God will listen.
Yeah. If I may dovetail, because about a year ago I found a verse in Joel, and you know where I'm going with that. Joel 2, and I'm going to read it. "I will restore to you the years that the swarming locust has eaten, or in my words, grief has eaten. The hopper, the destroyer, the cutter, my great army which I send among you." Here's the key words: "You shall again eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God." And here's the most beautiful statement for me: "who has done wondrously with you." I sit back and I think, God, of all how you've worked in my life, and through the anger, through the bitterness, through the resentment, through the abandonment, through the feelings of desertion, all those feelings, God has been faithful. And where there was a field that was scorched, there's now a new life coming up. And I look for it now. I don't just passively see it, I look for it. Oh, there's a new sprout in my life. There's a new sprout. There's a new plant. In my world, there's a new flower blossom. So I agree. I mean, but as part of our discussion was, hey, what does this look like to go from the initial stages of grief and then fast forward to 4 years, or here goes people who've been out 10 years.
Yeah.
This is the dimensions that I believe people will go through. At least I get careful in saying I believe each have your own path, but this is the path that Terry's experienced. And I'm experiencing new life, new hope, new opportunities. Not necessarily in all the places I expected them to be, but I'm also a new man writing a new book, and I have new eyes and new ears. I have a new processing system, and I speak differently. I respond differently. Shucks, some days I think I walk differently, but it's a transformation. It's a transformative process, this event called grief.
And as we journey through grief, which I think you're right. I think grief is actually a gift that God gives us for our healing. As we journey through grief and we go through it in the right way, which is with others to journey with us, and we don't deny our emotions, but we actually acknowledge them, give our emotions the dignity they deserve, we can find healing and see hope again. Dare to hope again.
Yeah, and that brings me to a point where it's also, and I've we use the word bittersweet in our recovery group, our support group. It's bitter because we had to lose a very, very beautiful and important person in our life, in our family. And now you fast forward a number of years and you see the trajectory, and here it goes. I wouldn't be in this place. I wouldn't be the man talking to you today if I didn't lose Marlis, right? My words would not have meaning or impact if I didn't lose Marlis. And to me, that bittersweet, but the sweet part of that is through the refining process, I've looked in the mirror a lot. Again, I am changed. I appreciate every moment. I live in the moment. Okay. In the day, I wake up every morning. I go, God, on my way to work, I say, looks like it's going to be a great day today, God. And God, will you grant me my portion? Will you grant me my manna today, my health, power and endurance, wisdom, discernment, joy, happiness, creativity, and may I see you today. Just through, again, natural beauty, community, people, family. But it's a paradigm shift where here it is. I believe that, and again, I got to be careful on saying a discrete timeline, but I think after 3-4 years, people, I speak for myself, I do have a choice to grieve, or I have a choice to choose joy or happiness. It does become a choice. I do know people who desire to live in grief, and I'm praying that with time, they will steadily move away from that trench or that place and choose the ability to be happy, joyous, live in the fullness of life again versus being stuck in a circular or whatever position. But the other is I have gratitude for everything. And every night I go to bed and I say, God, here's 2 or 3 things that I'm grateful for. And it's not like a toxic gratitude, like, oh, just here it is. It is, you know what? I got the car to the shop today. I seen that sunrise, God. I seen the colors. I felt that snowflake hit my face today. And it created a new feeling in my brain. And I thank you for that. I thank you for great people who brought joy or spoke to my heart today that I was not expecting. And so it's a changing process. It'll be, and again, I think bittersweet is the appropriate word for me. And again, I'm still on this journey. I still will be. I think I will experience grief until the day I die. It just will be softer. And it won't be as severe or fierce or as brutal as it is in the first couple of years. So I want to offer at least a few rays of sunshine for those individuals who are listening and who are unfortunately just starting this journey in this process.
I'm thinking about, some of what you shared. And so there's this idea. I'm in process here, so I don't know if I'll get it right, Terry. Okay, I don't know if I'll get it right, but when we say, you know what, it's all in your head, that's real. That doesn't make it less real. And there is a season where grief is so consuming that it fills your head and your heart and your mind and your soul, and it should. When the grief is too near. And then through the community of other people essentially thinking and feeling for you when you don't know what to think or feel, you can heal enough to where you start to think clearly again. And then again, it is still all in your head. And you can start to take control. And by taking control of focusing on joy and goodness and peace and love and the hope of God in Jesus, you can go. There's actually a really beautiful song. Maybe I'll link it here in the podcast notes. It's called "I Will Walk Boldly into the House of Grief." And it's written by a songwriter in Nashville, but she's also a therapist. And she ends the song by saying, "I will walk boldly into the house of grief because love always has the final word."
Beautiful.
And after the fog of grief subsides, we have to choose love.
Yeah.
We have to tell ourselves that God is loving and good, and his love was ultimately expressed in the death of Jesus. And Jesus took on more suffering than we will ever know in our lifetime and did it so that we would be healed. And so that love would have the final word.
Yeah, I would even, if again, I may interject into that or not, is I've asked myself, what does it look like when Terry's, if he's healed? And again, this is not something to get over, right? If you don't get over, you work through, you integrate into your life. What does it look like when Terry is healthy again?
Mm.
And the two things I can say are, number one, I can reflect on my ability to love again.
Mm.
And number two, I look at the ability to be grateful, because in the darkest days of grief, there is nothing to be grateful for. I would also use it as a barometer. And again, here's the clinical brain. My clinical brain working is, could we use gratitude? Could we use how well you love or can love or have the ability to love or receive love as indicator of a barometer of how you're moving along that pathway? And again, this is not implying you have to be here, here, here at this certain time period, but it's like, how do I self-reflect enough to go, I am moving, all right? I am moving towards a healthy direction versus I'm stuck.
Yes.
And I think, again, just the simplicity of, from my perspective, is, can you love anyone else? If you find it difficult to love anyone or to receive other people's love without covering it with bitterness, anger, sadness, then maybe you need some healing yet.
Mm.
But when you come out the other side, there will be things that you are grateful for, and it's a genuine gratefulness, right? And you'll capture yourself going, I can't feel this way. I shouldn't feel this way. I shouldn't feel grateful. I'm grieving. No, allow yourself to feel small doses. Take small little bites of gratitude from that apple, okay? And I do think that there's healing there, and again, an indication of healing. I don't know what your thoughts are on that as a therapist or as a pastor.
Oh man, I mean, I've always centered around the practice of gratitude as a way to heal. I don't know if I've thought about gratitude being a barometer or a measure of our healing. And I think it's both. Again, my loss and grief story is different than yours. I have a divorce in my past, and my first marriage fell apart, and it was not a pleasant time in my life. But having healed from that, I will never take for granted the love that my wife shows me. And even in our worst days, I can be grateful because it is better than my best days in my first marriage.
Yeah, it's amazing how our past and our where we have been and where we've been hurt, how that changes the paradigm moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't argue about toothpaste caps or toilet seats anymore. Ain't worth it. Ain't worth it. I'd rather argue about lightsabers, important things. But
important things.
Yeah, right. But I think I'm softer.
Yeah.
I'm more considerate.
Yeah.
I'm more open-minded. I'm more expansive in my thinking, right?
Yeah.
Of going, this isn't, I'm not battling on this hill. I'm not placing a flag here. That hill I will, but not this hill. Okay. And so I agree with you. I think it's, and to have the ability to love again is humbling. It's amazing. And I'll leave that there.
So you've learned to love again, and we're going to leave on a hopeful note here. You're engaged.
Yes.
To Vonnie Woodrick.
Yeah.
Which that's just wild. And I think in that, I mean, you've said it, but as we close, what's your hopeful word for someone who is in it right now?
Yeah, and I came up with a bunch of words, and here it is, probably more again of a sentence. When you get to, so bear with me, I'm going to deviate on that, but I think it's more goes back to the idea of you eventually will get to the place where you can choose between joy and grief. It may not seem possible where you're at right now, and I respect that. But when the opportunity comes, don't be afraid to take little nibbles out of that apple of called gratitude. Please do. God wants you to. Your fellow man wants you to. And you know what? The gratitude and then leads to love from my perspective. And I think, again, give yourself the ability to choose. Grief will still take me to my knees, and I allow it. But gratitude and joy will also take me to some new mountaintops, and I'm going to allow that too. Okay, that's the dynamic of this, right? And in this space, we oscillate, those who grieve, we oscillate between those two places. We sit in wonderment and joy and happiness, and then we break again. And then but the wound is healing. The wound is healing. And you know, I have a scar, and I'll be able to feel that scar. And it'll tell me where I went and where I've come from and the journey that I've been on. But the scar will always be there, but it's also healed. And I do believe, and again, in such a way, we'll always carry the energy and love of the memories of our loved one forward. They'll be integrated into our life. But those are my parting words / paragraph / 100 words versus one word. Sorry.
No, I really love that. I know you know this because you work in medicine, but scar tissue never stops healing. It actually, if we don't have enough vitamin C, our scars will open up again. Which is interesting because we need sunlight and proper nutrition for vitamin C. But a scar, when it's healed, it's not that it stops healing, it's always healing. And that's the process of grief.
Yeah.
You never stop grieving, but the beautiful part is you're constantly healing. And the more we look to joy and gratitude, the more we feed the healing process. Well, we got into some deep waters with Terry as we continued to talk through suicidal loss and grief. And I was so encouraged by what Terry shared with us and his practices of looking for joy and gratitude every single day in the healing process. As we go through grief and loss, it's easy for us to be defined by our loss and to stay in a place where we want to be angry, we want to be bitter, we want to stay bound up by what happened to us. But there's also a pathway for healing where we can acknowledge our pain and allow it to transform us and train ourselves to look toward hope. And I think Terry has done that. He hasn't done it perfectly. He'd be the first one to say that. But he's done that, and he is experiencing a fullness of life that he wasn't experiencing 5 years ago. And we hope that for you as well. If you've gone through a series of events that have caused loss or grief for you, we would love to help you navigate that. Reach out to us at fearlesschaplaincy.org or send us an email at chaplaincy@fearlessfollower.org. We'd love to talk with you and help you in your journey of navigating these intense emotions and these troubling times that you find yourself in. If this has been an encouragement to you, share this with a friend, maybe someone in your life who is going through grief and loss. And if you work at a company and you'd like for us to come in and talk a little bit about loss or grief or depression or suicide, just reach out and we'd love to make that connection as well. Join us next time as we continue this conversation on grief and loss by talking to another one of my friends who has an interesting story to share with us. We'll talk with you next time.